Good evening, public domain transfers of Bela Lugosi films. This is a new shaving lotion I have developed. It is for the throat in particular. You should try it. Goodbye, public domain home video transfers of the Devil Bat.
Ah, the new restoration master from better elements of the Devil Bat. Are you ready to strike vengeance against all the public domain transfers that have kept
The Devil Bat in terrible public domain video hell for so long? Yes, it is now time to properly enjoy the Devil Bat once again. On the Kino Lorber BLu-ray this time, in a new preserved master to perfectly show off the beautiful wonders of the Devil Bat. Hello and welcome back to this damn fool idealistic crusade. This video is a review of the Kino Lorber BLu-ray release of a new preservation master of the 1940 PRC Poverty Row film, The Devil Bat, which is one of the most beloved of all of the Bela Lugosi vehicles made at different Poverty Row studios in and out of the horror genre. These were the films that Lugosi was having to make to basically keep himself financially sustained when studios were no longer really trying to get his services. Not that he was ever well treated by major studios or Universal to begin with. And while for some people this would be seen as a major downgrade or the sort of absolute bottom or bottom of the barrel of where their film career could go, as all Lugosi fans know very well, he never treated any of the films or the roles he was playing as such. And this is perhaps the greatest example of the charm and the sort of magic that you get in a Bela Lugosi vehicle made at a Poverty Row studio. And if I had to choose a favorite, or the one that I think was the most effective and the most charming, it is indeed The Devil Bat, which is the film that has the rather ridiculous sort of premise of Bela Lugosi playing a scientist who feels that he has been taken advantage of by his business partners and enacts a scheme of revenge using his essentially mutated bats that he likes to experiment on. And by putting a particular very rare element in a shaving lotion that he develops, it basically marks and targets various people that he wants to bump off in his scheme of revenge. And so he just releases his swarm of bats, and the titular large oversized devil bat then basically is like a winged homing missile on the target of the poor soul who used said shaving lotion. Admittedly, this is a very, very silly plot, but the gist of it actually works in spite of the inherently goofy setup, and in fact, it works so well that PRC actually remade the concept more than once, and then actually did a quasi sequel a couple years later, although it's more of just like a sequel in name only. And then the sort of concept has been transmogrified and pulled around and reworked into all kinds of different elements and attempts at working on a similar theme. Now, this film was made at PRC, or the Producers Releasing Corporation. So it's it's obviously not a monogram film, which is what I think most people think of when they think of Poverty Row, and particularly films that both Lugosi and Karloff made for Poverty Row Studios. Typically, you're going to think of monogram. PRC is a little bit different, but it has a lot of the same charms. It's obviously a very tiny, minuscule budget. The film was shot in a very, very short schedule, and when they have to resort to effects for the bats and the bat props, it's obviously prop bats on wires flapping around, and then intercutting actual shots of real bats in captivity, and primarily the same bat, and probably what seems like the same piece of footage they've just chopped up and reused, scattered over the film. So there's that wonderful, charming quality of it being extremely low budget. But what you also get is basically everybody seeming like they wanted to be there. Every member of the cast is committed to their parts and has a sense of good humor and charm, and there's an energy in the film that it's just infectious, that you can't help but like this film, as hokey as it is, as low budget and threadbare as it is. And it's actually a lot better than a lot of the other films, or films with just as big of a reputation among horror fans or Lugosi fans, and such as the Monogram films. So, as silly as the premise of this film sounds, it actually helps to enliven the proceedings because you can laugh along with this film. You can laugh at the inherent limitations, and you actually enjoy them. They're not a hindrance. So this is probably an easy gateway for people if you've never seen one of the Poverty Row programmer films, or a Poverty Row horror film, or especially one of the Poverty Row horror vehicles that had Bela Lugosi or Boris Karloff around this time period in the 1930s and 40s, in and around their times at bigger studios. This is a perfect way to get into these types of films because most of them are obviously not really the greatest films in the world, and so you need that sort of inherent goofiness to up the enjoyment factor. And this one, I think, has it in spades. And of the Lugosi Poverty Row films and the non-Universal films, this one is my favorite. I think it has the most charm. I think it has the most commitment from the rest of the cast, and it has enough humor and enough liveliness when Lugosi isn't on screen that the film just doesn't stop dead in its tracks and becomes a slog to get through, like unfortunately some of the Poverty Row films could do. So our scientist starts offing people to sort of enact this rather odd revenge scheme against his business partners at this cosmetics company they've built up around his inventions and things. But Lugosi's character has never received the massive windfall that his partners did because he was sort of a victim of his own research and made a rather ill-advised deal many years before. But his plan of revenge is essentially to kill off innocent victims one at a time, and also the children of his business partners. So he's actually he feels slightly guilty and has a conscience about this, at least to a certain degree, because he's basically just killing off people that he knows and is on friendly terms with, who have nothing to do with any of this. And there's this wonderful recurring character motif that Lugosi gets to play when he goes to one of the guys or has them come to his lab, and then we see them get presented with the shaving lotion. We know they're not long for this world. They're about to have a meeting with the Devil Bat in the next minute or two. But there's this nice motif for Lugosi's character where he's having his goodbye, but you see it dawn on him, and you see his face change, and you hear his voice drop because he knows he's actually bidding farewell to this person. He's the last person who's going to see them alive. And so you see this wonderful little turn in the performance every time at one of these bits where all of a sudden you see his face drop, and then he has the line. He just says goodbye and shakes their hand, but he's like, goodbye, It's just a wonderful recurring motif that becomes just endearing, because we know that's, of course, because he knows he's about to just have this person murdered by the Devil Bat. It must be underlined that Lugosi's conviction is, as always, at superhuman levels. There's not a false note in the performance, and it's his conviction that really moves the scenes forward. And when he's on the screen, the film really has that wonderful energy, and it even is able to sell the moments when it's Lugosi operating in a laboratory and interacting with a bunch of stuffed bat props that are not very convincing, and then intercutting with the footage of the real bat. And he has such a delight and a gleam that comes into his eyes. He sells the sort of inherent mania of this professor character with such ease that it's, again, an absolutely stunning performance. And that's the real draw of all the Lugosi performances in Poverty Row films. He never gave anything less than his absolute best, and that's something that you can't say about every actor. And so even in the most dire of films, it's his conviction that keeps you interested when he's on screen. But here in The Devil Bat, there's enough charm outside of that. And due to the extremely brief running time of about 68 minutes, so this is just over an hour, as almost all Poverty Row programmer films are, it doesn't overstay its welcome, and it never starts to drag because we have enough humor peppered throughout. The plot then revolves mostly around the team of reporters sent out to investigate the purported devil bat killings, and then how they try to spin it up into a bigger story and have some dealings with the locals and the victims' families, and also their editor. So there's, it's basically turning into a sort of quasi reporters, not a screwball comedy, but there's definitely elements of a 1930s, 1940s newspaperman comedy setup. So that means for the film's short runtime, we only have certain scenes and sequences with Lugosi. We open with Lugosi in his laboratory, and after that, he's just sort of peppered throughout the rest of the film. And because the rest of the performances are natural enough and have an easygoing charm to them, and a bit of wit, and you can see that everyone is actually enjoying themselves making this wacky picture, that you're okay with not having Lugosi in every scene of the film. And so when he shows back up, it picks the energy back up, and it lets the plot move forward a little bit more. So there's never a point at which when this film drags or gets bogged down or anything. So it also has a good sense of its own rhythm, and it never gets on your nerves. It never grates, and it moves with such efficiency that it keeps that good-natured spirit going. And so I don't think there's any audience member who won't have some fun with the Devil Bat. And again, it's so short that and has such a charm to it, and is so obviously a Poverty Row film, that as ridiculous as it is, this is an absolute joy and delight, right down to our lead reporter's very striking question mark tie. So you'll find yourself looking at all kinds of little bits of business in this film. Some of the sets and things, one or two bits that obviously have a bit of a Dracula tinge to them, because you've got a prop bat flapping around a house, and so of course starring Bela Lugosi, so you can't help but make the Dracula connections or parallels. But it also helps that for the most part, most of the characters aren't completely dumb and reactionary. You have some of those, and of course the actual bat killings, when it swoops down, and you have this shot that they use as stock footage of it flapping around, obviously day for night, and then just swooping down on somebody who just stands there and goes, oh! It's wonderfully charming and super goofy in all of the best ways, as is the shot that shows the prop bats coming out of Lugosi's character's window in his attic. Essentially, he goes up there and opens the window, and then we see these prop bats coming out on wires, and then we see the big devil bat prop come out. So it's just a wonderfully wacky, charming, goofy programmer that has such a heart to it that it becomes a favorite very quickly. And this is a film you will want to return to and add to your yearly October viewing slate for Halloween, for example. It's probably my favorite Lugosi Poverty Row film. I've seen most of them, and this one is just easily the most charming and the most deliriously wacky in ways, and it's just a pleasure and a treat to return to. The problem has been that it's been stuck in public domain hell for decades, so there have been multitudes of versions of this film of really dire and poor quality, transferred from whatever sources one of these public domain labels could get their hands on. So you'll also see countless versions online or on YouTube that look and sound like utter crap. And of course, it's bundled in a lot of different horror collections of public domain titles. Before this point, there were really only one or two releases that tried to get a cleaner print or do a decent enough presentation. And this has been the case for all of the Poverty Row horror films, and especially all the Lugosi and Karloff films that they made at Poverty Row Studios. Even the non-horror films have been stuck in public domain hell and all kinds of horrible prints and transfers and things. So So getting a decent copy of the Devil Bat in particular has been very tough. One of the only good versions that I'm aware of before this point is actually on the Roan Laserdisc box set that I have here of various Karloff and Lugosi Poverty Row films, including the Devil Bat, which, obviously this was during the Laserdisc era, but the Roan group did try to put together at least some cleaner prints, and this is still one of the most solid versions of the Devil Bat, actually, in terms of official physical media releases. In fact, it's really just about the only one that's official and actually halfway decent, but of course is limited due to the prints they could access at the time. But now we turn to the Kino Lorber Blu-ray release, which is following suit with a lot of the other Lugosi and Karloff Poverty Row films that they've released on Blu-ray in a variety of different restorations from the best print sources that could be cobbled together. Some were partnered with the Library of Congress, some with other entities and various collectors. So this is following along in that same line, and that's why on the cover it's got all the blurb about it being a restoration or preservation from 35mm elements. So this was done around the same time, and you do need to expect it does have quite a bit of printed in damage from the sources, because they basically had to cobble together a master and do the best they could with a mix of sources. So there is a little bit of 16mm footage in here as well. And if you've seen any of the other Kino Lorber releases of things like the monogram film The Ape with Karloff, or the Death Kiss that I have behind me here, which is a Library of Congress restoration of different elements that is unfortunately limited because of those. They've also done the Lugosi film Invisible Ghost, which unfortunately is out of print, but this one follows suit with those. So this is a preservation master. This is not a pristine restoration or anything, and they did have to rely on 16mm sources for a particular section. So to then talk about the picture quality, this is kind of all over the place in terms of what's on the elements they had. It is a brand new scan of the 35mm sources that they had to access, and then also a particular section from 16mm. So in terms of what you're going to see in this, obviously there is damage. There are printed in scratches, hairs, some missing frames, some frame wobble, some actual moving in the frame, some spots of significant wear and heavy damage, and even some spots where the actual edge of the frame is visible. But that's all inherent in the element they had to work with. And of course, for these films to even have some sort of better element is darn near impossible. So to even have any sort of new work done on a Poverty Row film and have it with a new scan, with actually trying to make a new preservation master for films that have been stuck in the public domain for so long, is really something. And, obviously it's going to have these defects, and that will be something you have to live with, because, obviously the original negative is long gone, and this was made at PRC, where already the budgets were limited. So I don't think they necessarily had element storage on their mind when they were trying to crank out programmers. So this is really the best the Devil Bat has ever looked on home video. That's really just a blanket statement, because if you've ever seen this film in particular before, you know just how bad it looked and sounded. Even on the best versions like the Roan Laserdisc, it's still, they were just scanning an old print, the best one they could find, and that was very limited. And in spite of the damage in this master and the element they were having to work with, and they had to jump to 16mm for a portion, this looks really good. I have to say, I was very, very pleasantly surprised with how good this looked and sounded, considering this was a PRC film and a public domain staple in horrible releases and transfers for decades. So this is an enormous leap forward in quality in both picture and sound, in spite of the inherent issues with the elements they had to work with, and in spite of having to jump down to 16mm for a section where everything obviously is reduced in quality quite a bit. All that is really just, you quickly forget about it, because the overall presentation of this preservation master is really something for this film. I think this is one of the best looking preservation attempts or official new Blu-ray releases of a Poverty Row horror film that I've seen. I think it cleans up really well in spite of the inherent damage and sections where there's more heavy wear. So this is a must upgrade simply for the technical aspects. The audio is also similarly improved. There is still some hiss in the track in some moments where there is some damage, or there's also one or two very tiny moments where, because of the missing frames, there is a tiny dropout, but it is very minor and all down to the actual elements they're having to work from. So overall, in spite of the limitations of the element and the damage in both the picture and the audio track because of the source they were working from, this is a lightning leap forward compared to the hideous transfers and public domain releases and online uploads you'll find of this film. This is really the only proper way to see this film, and while it is still not perfect, you've had people really work hard on this to try and make it as good as humanly possible. And for the Devil Bat, it really is a wonderful treat for those of us who have seen the film before and really struggled with how bad it looked and sounded, even though we liked the film, and it's because it's so charming. Now you can actually see it in a respectable quality that's I'd say probably about as close as you get to seeing it when it was brand new in 1940. And this is a really important film for Lugosi at this point in time, because he was just coming off of the success of Son of Frankenstein in 1939. He's still in relatively good health and has good energy, and it's just a delight to watch and return to. And seeing it in this preservation master is just... I mean, you will be bowled over if you've seen this film before, and you'll know just how bad it looked and sounded. Well, just get a copy of this Blu-ray from Kino and take one look at this preservation master, and it's going to seem like a completely new film to you, because you no longer have to struggle through the horrible public domain transfers of the Devil Bat. So look at the packaging. We have the Kino approach, which actually is talking again about the restoration from archival film elements. This is done to mimic what you see on their releases of The Death Kiss and other similar films. And then we have lovely original poster artwork. We have the same plain sort of generic label that you see on the other films they've done in this sort of... I mean, it's not a line of these, but I guess you could technically call it a line of Poverty Row films being given preservation masters. Then the rear follows suit in the same sort of design. We have more original imagery, and then we have the little blue and white box talking about the technical notes and the few extras. This is the same sort of design you see on the other Kino releases, like The Death Kiss. So they've matched all the cover layouts very much across all of these, even though it's not a specific line. It kind of is. So here we have the mentions of some of the technical notes, which is great because we don't really get this on the disc or anywhere. So as you can see, this is credited as mastered in HD from archival elements, and down here you get the production credits, and that the 35mm material actually came from Bob Firmneck of the 3D Film Archive. And then you've got the little mention here that they were basically using an archival 35mm print with a 9-minute section derived from a 16mm element. So this is the little bit of technical information you get about the transfer. So this is basically your transfer notes, because this is all you get. But this will explain what you're seeing and why it's such a dramatic upgrade over the horrible versions we've lived with all these years before this point. Now, in terms of extras, we do actually get a really important one, which is a brand new commentary by Richard Harland Smith, who's done tracks on some of the other Kino Poverty Row vehicles, and once again does an excellent job talking about this film, talking about the cast and crew, its production at PRC, its placement in Lugosi's career in the year 1940, and also the wonderful whimsical charms of this film. He also talks about his history with it, seeing it when he was growing up, and just loving it pretty much immediately, as I think all of us do who are classic horror fans. So especially for a programmer that's only 68 minutes, and there's obviously not the most information information in the world out there about the Devil Bat, made at PRC, and it's always harder to talk about films where it's not a critical darling, obviously, and it's a shorter film, shorter runtime, and there's not a whole lot of information about the production. So he does a great job at covering all of the important topics and the cast and crew and the sort of story and history of PRC and how they compared to the other studios on Poverty Row like Monogram and Republic. So it's a great commentary track just like his other ones, and it makes the disc all the more desirable because it has a great commentary. Then we do have a little image gallery to round things off, so at least you do get that as well. And the menus do have some imagery from some original materials as well. So at least the menus are also relatively solid. And then that's it for the extras. So really, it's the fact that you're getting this new Preservation Master and the wonderful new Richard Harland Smith commentary. This is yet another release from Kino Lorber of really a resuscitation of a Poverty Row, a beloved horror classic among aficionados that, while it doesn't have the greatest production strengths in the world, is easily one of the most charming of all the Poverty Row horror films that either Bela Lugosi or Boris Karloff ever made. And for me personally, this is my favorite of all of Lugosi's Poverty Row horror films. He gets a nice showy part, he gets some great standout moments, he's obviously enjoying himself, as is the rest of the entire cast, and it's just such an endearingly charming, goofy, funny little film that very much wears its Poverty Row status on its sleeve and doesn't make any bones about it. And then, because that's out of the way, the energy of the film allows the story to move along at a good clip and never really start to bog down or get slow or feel dull. And it's also got a very quick runtime. So this has been a wonderful film that I've enjoyed returning to over the years, but always hated how terrible the transfers were and how it was stuck in public domain hell. And now we have this Kino Lorber Blu-ray, which is really the only way to see this properly, and an absolute essential upgrade or title to pick up for all classic horror fans, and especially all Bela Lugosi fans. This is a fantastic, again, resuscitation of a PRC film, and is such a dramatic leap forward in quality that it will feel like a completely different film if you've seen it before, because you've never seen it look and sound this good. And it's quite miraculous that it looks and sounds as good as it does on this Kino release. So just like their releases of The Death Kiss and The Ape and some of the other Poverty Row titles they've done, this is a must-own, this is a must-upgrade, and now you can finally junk all of the old public domain transfers from hell and simply never bother with them again. So as always, I hope my babblings about classic horror films, Poverty Row programmers, and physical media releases has been at least somewhat fun and informative. Please do check out not just this release, but all of the Poverty Row preservations that Kino Lorber has put out on Blu-ray. They're really something, and they so wipe the floor with the horrible public domain editions that have existed ever since the dawn of home video, that they really are impressive and something special, and not something I ever thought we'd ever see. So it's great we even have these, although it would be fantastic if this could be a sort of continuing trend. But, you know, obviously you have to find the elements and have the budget and have the desire to do it, and there's not a whole lot of money in it because these are public domain films, so any one we get is extremely important, and because the elements are so compromised for these, it makes it doubly so to preserve what we can while we have the opportunity to do so. So if you've seen the Kino release of The Devil Bat, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, particularly if you're like me and you'd only seen this before and just the horrible versions that are floating around, and then this, it just seems miraculous in terms of the transfer quality of this Preservation Master. And as always, please do keep supporting both boutique and studio labels by buying films on disc to help keep both physical media and film culture alive. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.